welcome back to the program. A very exciting day for freedom of speech. I don't get to say that a lot these days. Here in Toronto, the criminal prosecution of a man for engaging in debates on Twitter against feminists. A 3-year prosecution came to a close with the verdict of an acquittal. Joining me now to talk about the case of Gregory Alan Elliott is our friend Lauren Southern. Welcome, and thanks for coming in for Vancouver today.
Hi, Ezra. Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure.
It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure to have you here. You're a great warrior for free speech and against vicious, authoritarian social justice warriors. Tell me a little bit about this case today.
Well, essentially, it started 3 years ago when Gregory Alan Elliott was doing actually free design work for these Women in Toronto Poly feminists, and they got into a bit of a scuff, and these feminists got mad at a guy on Twitter who created a game where you could punch a feminist in the face. So they decided they wanted to sick the internet on this gentleman, and Greg was like, maybe, sure, the game he made was bad, but sicking the internet on someone is just as bad. And they got into a scuffle, started fighting on Twitter. Nothing worse than you see on Twitter every single day.
So this is one of the tweets by Gregory Alan Elliott 3 years ago, saying losers who attack in a cowardly pack. So he had actually helped these girls, but he didn't like the fact that they were being vicious, and so he named them. So just to be clear, this Gregory Alan Elliott, he was not making this punch a feminist game. He was just saying stop this forming.
No, he was not. He was just, he said the kid who made it was a young kid. He may have made a malicious game, but what you ladies are planning to do to him is just as malicious.
So they were going to be mean girls and try and blemishes. I mean, the internet can be a pretty nasty place, but it takes two to tango. I mean, on the internet, if you don't want to be harassed, just flick it off or block people, right?
Basically, well, they were actually going out of their way to find this guy and go and sick the internet. So after that, these girls decided that him questioning them on Twitter and continually going back and forth, they were making accusations about him being a pedophile, being a harasser, just these terrible, terrible accusations about him. And he'd go and defend himself. He'd tweet into hashtags. He'd tweet using their names. And they said because he was tweeting most of the time defending himself, because he was using their names, that was harassment.
Not just harassment, but criminal harassment. So let me sum up here, because I want to make sure we're clear. You talked about the particular starting point. He was sort of their friend, but then he objected to them being mean to some other guy. That's all interesting background, but really the heart of this case was this one man, Gregory Alan Elliott, got into a war of words on Twitter against some ex-friends, let's say, and they were all given and taken good, but then the feminists called the cops. Have I summed things up correctly?
Yep, and he was actually arrested. He was arrested, and they brought either 7 or 9 tweets, and he was arrested because of those tweets. And even now, the judge has said none of these tweets were violent. None of them were even harassment.
Yeah, we showed a couple of them on there, but tell me, I mean, you paid very close attention to this trial. You interviewed the family. You were there today. Tell me the worst of it. What was the absolute worst thing that Greg Alan Elliott said, according to the judge? The worst.
There was just, it was so mild. I think the worst one was he said that one of the accusers or complainants, Heather Riley, said she had a fat ass.
Now, I get called that all the time, but that's just at home. I won't bring my family life into this. No, I'm kidding. If calling someone fat or a fat ass, I might call that rude. I might call that straight talk. But to call that a criminal act worthy of, how many police, was he handcuffed? I have no idea. But they prosecuted him for 3 in a criminal court. We got all the murders taken care of in Toronto. We got all the rapes taken care of in Toronto. So this is the most important crime to fight in Toronto.
Apparently.
But today, and you just brought this into me, an 85-page ruling. Let's get to the good news. After 3 years of hell that he and his family went through, Justice Brent Knazin, tell me, I mean, he read this out in court. What was it like listening to it?
It was surreal. He said innocent, and there was just a relief over the court because he was facing 6 months in prison or jail if he was convicted of this crime that isn't even a crime, just speaking. But listening to a judge actually it seemed ridiculous listening to him read out tweets, talking about hashtags. He was literally describing smiley faces at the end of messages in this court case.
You know the phrase, don't make a federal case out of it? It's a term, it's a phrase, it's an idiom. Oh, don't make a federal case. They really made a federal case.
Yes.
Out of some Twitter tweet. How did the judge have any, I haven't read this, so you just delivered to me, and I thank you for that. I will go through it in detail. Did the judge have any words of criticism for the prosecutor who decided to prosecute, or for the police who made the charges? Surely he cannot have been pleased to have spent 3 years and to see these resources of the state brought to bear against an innocent man in what looks to me like an abuse of process. It's one thing to say to the guy, your prosecution's over, you can go now. Oh, and you've got a huge legal fee. But what about the machinery of the state? This wasn't a civil suit. Yeah. This was a criminal prosecution, taxpayers, the Department of Justice. Did the judge have anything to say about that?
Well, he was very, very polite and politically correct about the way he presented it. He was very nice to these girls in the way he presented it, the girls that came forward against Greg. He was strong in his points, saying this is freedom of speech in Canada, but he would also say, maybe they did feel harassed, so that's fair, but we just don't have evidence for it. So he was kind of just polite in the way he presented it. Obviously, if it were either one of us, we would have been angry because that is a massive waste of time, massive waste of tax dollars.
But there's the stigma too. I mean, if some loser sues you in civil court, you sort of say, oh, that's a hassle. But when the Queen, the name of the case is the Queen versus Gregory Alan Elliott, in the name of the country, in the name of the Queen, with the resources of the state, and if it was a conviction, it would be a mark against him that he was deemed an unperson. That's far more serious than just a bunch of girls, complaining or kvetching. And I am deeply disturbed that this even got so far. I'm glad it stopped where it stopped. But I think that Marnie Goldenberg, the prosecutor, and I think the police involved, they have some answering to do. Did they seem contrite in any way?
The Crown didn't speak. It was only the judge speaking the whole day. And I think the police should absolutely have to answer it. I think the Crown should have to answer for it. But the judge, the judge was just very polite with the entire process. It was very, very strange.
Well, and the judge has to be careful, because if he shows some intemperate conduct himself, that would open this case up to an appeal even. Anyone can appeal this. The Crown can appeal this. But the judge and how he writes it, I think, has to take a moderate and thoughtful and balanced judge-like tone. Do you think that this will be appealed, or do you think the ridicule on this prosecutor and these police and these complainants is so much that they won't proceed?
I am hoping that Gregory Alan Elliott himself will go forward and, because these girls, quite frankly, he can't sue these girls for the money that he's lost, the time that he's lost. They don't have money.
Right. They
don't have money. However, the police and the Crown, they have an opportunity there.
There's a lot of limits and immunities for suing prosecutors and cops. But let me ask you my final question. You've been very generous with your time. You know what? I want to mention to our viewers that Lauren has done so much work on this, including today. You were down at the courthouse. So this is just a little recap, because you have interviews, you were at the courthouse. This is just a teaser, folks. Go elsewhere on our website to get the full Lauren Southern details. I'm just grabbing her before she flies home. Last question to you. You mentioned that we covered this story, obviously. Christy Blatchford covered it with an eye to political correctness and freedom of speech. How would you say the mainstream media in general treated this issue? Did journalists stand up for freedom of speech, or were they more standing up for feminist authoritarianism?
I'd have to say feminist authoritarianism. Quite frankly, Guthrie is friends with the CBC. She goes on their show. She's been on Q. Guthrie and all of these feminists, they're all connected with the Toronto government, with the media. They've been published in, Guthrie was published in the Toronto Sun, I believe, as one of the top tweeters of 2015.
My God.
Yes, and she's winning all of these awards. She's on CBCQ, and they are still, I saw people from BuzzFeed tweeting out today saying they don't care about the verdict. They're going to find harassment that Greg did to women, like searching to continue this case. And I'm like, this guy has been through enough.
It's incredible to me. Obviously, Twitter wanted this acquittal because Twitter wants its forum to be free for users, but on the other hand, Twitter itself has been cracking down through their own internal social justice warriors against Milo Yiannopoulos and other people. So I have to say, censorship is on the march in the prosecution, in the police, in Twitter itself. We have one judge who stood against it today.
Well, even then, this isn't the end of this. One of the scariest things I heard today was when he said if there were one tweet in there that could have been deemed harassing, could have been deemed a little more violent, it would be a very different trial. Yeah. Very different.
We live in dangerous days if you care about freedom. I know you do, Lauren. You fight for it hard every day. We do too here in Toronto. The Rebel, you're our western flank. Thank you for doing everything you do.
Absolutely.
And folks, Lauren Southern's outstanding in fighting against radical social justice warriors and feminism. You can see the rest of her coverage of this important matter elsewhere. In fact, we've set up a special website with all of Lauren's work called twitterfreedom.com. Twitterfreedom.com. You can type that in and get all her stuff.